Sweden and Denmark will jointly procure mobile anti-aircraft artillery systems worth 245 million euros for Ukraine as the country experienced one of its worst nights of overnight attacks.
Russia's winter air campaign was never designed to be clever. It was designed to be endless. Cheap drones, low-altitude flight paths, repetition instead of precision. Night after night, the same pattern. Launch enough Shaheds, cruise missiles, and decoys that something eventually gets through. Not because Ukraine's defenses are weak, but because even strong defenses get tired. This is how Russia tries to win wars now, not by overwhelming quality, by exhausting attention, interceptors, and people. A drone that costs a few tens of thousands of dollars doesn't need to destroy a city to be effective. It only needs to force a defender to spend more than it's worth. One interceptor fired at the wrong target is already a partial Russian success. 10 interceptors fired at decoys is better. 100 over weeks starts to reshape the battlefield. Cheap drones kill cheap lives, and expensive defenses, that's the logic. And for months, Ukraine has been living inside it. Air defense crews cycling through exhaustion, radar operators staring at screens that never go quiet, commanders making decisions knowing that every shot taken tonight is one less option tomorrow. The risk isn't that Ukraine can't shoot Russian drones down, it's that eventually it has to choose which ones matter. That's the pressure Russia counts on. Because once defenders start conserving interceptors, infrastructure becomes vulnerable. Power grids flicker, repair crews work under threat, civilians learn to sleep in short windows between sirens. This isn't a failure of Ukrainian capability, it's a math problem Russia believes favors it. Russia has quantity, Ukraine has quality, and quantity only has to last longer. That's why low-altitude threats matter so much. They sit in the uncomfortable middle ground, too cheap to justify burning high-end missiles, too dangerous to ignore, too numerous to treat individually. They turn modern air defense into a war of attrition instead of protection. For a long time, Russia assumed this gap would remain, that Europe would keep sending high-end systems designed to stop high-end threats, that Ukraine would keep spending expensive interceptors on cheap targets, that fatigue would accumulate faster than solutions. That assumption is now breaking, not because Ukraine found a miracle weapon, and not because Russia suddenly ran out of drones, but because two countries looked at the math and decided to change it, quietly, deliberately. And in a way, Russia's winter strategy was never built to absorb. Sweden and Denmark aren't just sending equipment, they're buying a different kind of battlefield. One where low-altitude threats stop being cheap leverage. One where drone saturation stops being an efficient tactic. One where Russia's favorite winter tool starts costing more than it delivers. And the system they chose wasn't designed to win headlines. It was designed to survive volume. Because the real danger in this war isn't a single missile getting through. It's what happens when defenders start running out of patience, people, and options before attackers run out of drones. That's the problem Russia has been betting everything on. And it's the problem Sweden and Denmark just decided to target directly. Russia's air campaign only works if defenders keep responding the same way. High-end missile systems were built for high-end threats: ballistic missiles, fast jets, cruise missiles flying predictable profiles. They were never meant to be the first line of defense against endless, low-cost saturation. That mismatch is where Russia has been pressing hardest. Every Shahed drone forces a choice: shoot it down with an expensive interceptor or risk letting it through. Either option costs something, and Russia doesn't need perfection, it only needs the defender to bleed faster than it does. This is why the winter campaign looks the way it does. It deliberately targets the uncomfortable layer of airspace where traditional defenses feel wasteful, but ignoring the threat feels reckless. And for months, Ukraine has had to play that game. Even with Western systems in place, there's a structural problem. You can't build enough top-tier interceptors fast enough to counter bottom-tier threats forever. The economics don't work, the production timelines don't work, and the people operating those systems don't work on infinite stamina. That's the attrition Russia counts on, not because Ukraine lacks skill, because Ukraine has limits, and Europe knows this. The uncomfortable truth is that Europe can't just outproduce Russia overnight. Supply chains are slower, factories take time, ammunition and missile stockpiles were never built for a war measured in years of constant fire. So the question stopped being, how do we shoot down everything? And became, how do we stop Russia from benefiting from quantity at all? That's the shift. Because as long as Russia can force Ukraine to trade expensive defenses for cheap threats, the pressure keeps compounding. Fatigue grows, mistakes creep in, and eventually something critical slips. This is where most support packages stall. They reinforce strength at the top of the threat ladder, but leave the middle exposed. They protect cities from catastrophic strikes, but struggle against constant harassment. Russia understood that gap early, and for a long time, it worked. Until the logic flipped. Because instead of asking Ukraine to keep spending more, Sweden and Denmark asked a different question entirely. What if the cheap threats stopped being cheap? What if drones no longer forced defenders into bad trades? What if the airspace Russia relies on for pressure became hostile again? Not at the top, but right where Russia lives. Russia's drone strategy only works in one specific environment. Low altitude, repetition, predictable defender reactions. That's the space Russia turned into a weapon. And it's exactly the space the Trident Mark II was built to dominate. This isn't a missile system designed to chase targets hundreds of kilometers away. It doesn't try to be elegant. It doesn't try to be rare. It's designed to sit where Russia pushes hardest and say, this no longer works. A 40mm air defense cannon doesn't sound dramatic in an era of hypersonics. That's why it's dangerous, because Russia's drones aren't hypersonic. They're slow, loud, and fly low. And they come back again and again along the same routes. The Trident Mark II was designed for that exact problem. High rate of fire, programmable ammunition, integrated radar and sensors. A system that doesn't panic when targets arrive in waves. Where a missile interceptor feels like a precious decision, this feels like a routine response. And that's the shift Russia wasn't planning for. Russia's winter campaign depends on forcing Ukraine to hesitate, to think about cost, to conserve. The Trident doesn't hesitate. It's built to fire at the kind of targets Russia assumed defenders would eventually stop prioritizing, the kind of threats that were supposed to slip through once fatigue set in. Instead, they hit a wall of steel and airburst rounds designed to shred drones that rely on being cheap and numerous. This changes the economics immediately. A drone that once forced a missile launch now forces a cannon response. A swarm that once drained stockpiles now burns time instead. And time is the one thing Russia's drone campaign can't afford to lose, because repetition only works when each attempt increases pressure. Once attempts start failing cheaply and consistently, repetition turns into waste. And this isn't just about killing drones. It's about restoring control of the lower airspace, the layer Russia has been abusing to shape behavior, slow repairs, and exhaust crews. With systems like this in place, defenders stop asking, is this drone worth an interceptor? They start asking, how many can we clear before the next wave? That mental shift matters, because fatigue isn't just physical, it's psychological. Russia's campaign works when defenders feel like every night is a losing trade, when every alert feels heavier than the last. The Trident Mark II flips that feeling. Now the attacker is the one repeating a failing action. Now the defender isn't choosing between bad options. Now, low-altitude airspace becomes hostile again. Russia's campaign works when defenders feel like every night is a losing trade, when every alert feels heavier than the last. The Trident Mark II flips that feeling. Now, low-altitude airspace becomes hostile again. And here's the part Russia really didn't expect. This system wasn't donated as an afterthought. It wasn't scraped together from surplus. It was bought deliberately as part of a wider plan. Because Sweden and Denmark didn't just decide to send Ukraine a tool, they decided to invest in a capability that changes how long Ukraine can endure. And that brings us to the real story, not the weapon itself, but who paid for it, and why that decision matters more than the hardware ever will. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment donation. Denmark didn't wake up one morning and decide to send whatever it had lying around. It didn't empty warehouses or strip its own defenses to make a political point. It bought capability. That distinction matters more than it sounds, because buying means planning. Buying means timelines. Buying means someone looked at Russia's campaign and decided the threat wasn't temporary. Denmark's decision to jointly procure the Trident Mark II with Sweden wasn't about generosity, it was about math. Russia's drone war isn't meant to win battles outright, it's meant to grind, to turn time into a weapon, to stretch defenses until even strong systems start leaking. Denmark understood that the real danger wasn't a single winter, it was the assumption that this pressure could be repeated year after year. So instead of reinforcing Ukraine at the top end, where systems are expensive, rare, and slow to replace, Denmark targeted the layer Russia was exploiting most: low altitude, cheap threats, high repetition. By paying for new production instead of transferring old stock, Denmark avoided a trap that's crippled a lot of well-intentioned aid. It didn't create a gap at home, it didn't depend on leftovers, and it didn't treat this as a one-off gesture. It treated it as capacity creation. That's a strategic mindset shift, because capacity doesn't just help Ukraine once, it helps every future wave, every repeated tactic, every attempt Russia makes to lean on quantity instead of quality. And Denmark didn't do it alone. Partnering with Sweden wasn't symbolic cooperation, it was industrial logic, shared funding, shared production pipelines, shared responsibility for keeping systems flowing even if the war drags on longer than anyone wants to admit. This is what serious support looks like. Not scrambling to respond after the damage is done, but changing the cost structure of the attack itself. For Russia, this is deeply uncomfortable, because Russia can absorb sanctions, it can absorb losses, it can absorb bad headlines. What it struggles with is losing efficiency. A campaign designed to be cheap and exhausting stops making sense once it becomes expensive and ineffective. Once drones stop draining interceptors and start draining launch crews instead. Denmark's choice doesn't just protect Ukraine's airspace, it attacks the logic of Russia's winter strategy, and it sends a message Russia can't ignore. This isn't about holding on until something breaks. It's about making sure the pressure never adds up in the first place. That's what Sweden and Denmark just bought. Not victory, but time. And in this war, time is the most dangerous thing Russia can lose.